Hola and hello, soy tu profesor Joe Walsh. Ya estamos en el tercer día de este intensivo. En los últimos 2 días hemos aprendido cómo aprender inglés con el método video inmersión. Hemos aprendido que la habilidad de escuchar y entender, o sea, el listening, es la base de toda la fluidez en el inglés o en cualquier otro idioma. También hemos aprendido cómo practicar hablando con juegos, o sea, con una dinámica que guía la conversación y que no necesitamos conversar con, o sea, no necesitamos hablar con hablantes nativos. Podemos practicar el habla hablando nosotros solos y también con otras personas que también están aprendiendo el inglés. Aunque claro, si puedes hablar con un hablante nativo, es una excelente oportunidad. ¿Ok? Bien, entonces hoy vamos a cambiar de tema un poco. Seguro te estás preguntando, bueno, si nada más estoy practicando escuchar, hablar, leer y escribir, ¿cómo voy a corregir mis errores de gramática, de pronunciación, etcétera, etcétera? Porque normalmente las clases de inglés se enfocan mucho en esos temas, o sea, tienen muchas actividades en que tienes que corregir una frase o llenar una burbuja con la palabra correcta. am, y bueno, lo que yo diría es que como ya sabes español, realmente no necesitas hacer todo eso. O sea, el español y el inglés se parecen tanto, sobre todo en lo que es la gramática, el vocabulario y la pronunciación, que no es cuestión de aprender todo eso desde cero. Bien, es como si aprendieras portugués. Bien, ya sabes que el portugués y el español se parecen muchísimo. De hecho, puedes leer el portugués casi sin nunca haber estudiado nada del idioma, ¿ok? Porque tantas palabras son tan parecidas o iguales aún. Y bueno, el inglés no se parece tanto al español como el portugués, pero sí se parece bastante. Entonces, diría yo que en lo que tiene que ver con la gramática, la pronunciación, el vocabulario, más bien es mejor tratar de aprender las diferencias en vez de tratar de aprender desde cero. Sobre todo, aprender a corregir los errores que seguro vas a cometer debido a las diferencias entre los dos idiomas. Bien, entonces, en esta clase vamos a hacer algo diferente. Voy a compartir contigo unas lecciones de mis cursos que tengo para mis estudiantes. Son cursos de videos que yo grabé bueno, justo antes de la pandemia. Vas a notar cierta diferencia en mí. Am, la primera lección presenta cuáles son las diferencias entre la gramática del inglés y la del español y es más bien una presentación estilo con diapositivas, solo dura 2 o 3 minutos. De ahí, el resto de los videos son lecciones que yo grabé personalmente en un estudio de grabación am, y las grabé justamente en inglés. ¿Ok? Las grabé en inglés porque realmente en un curso de inglés uno tiene que estar escuchando inglés. Aunque tenga un nivel muy bajo del idioma, aún así debería acostumbrarse a escuchar el idioma, ¿no? Y yo los he creado con subtítulos en ambos idiomas, primero en inglés y luego en español. Y puedes leer el subtítulo que más te conviene. Si ya sabes bastante inglés, puedes leer los subtítulos en inglés para cuando te cuesta entender una palabra o simplemente en español si no entiendes lo que estoy diciendo. ¿De acuerdo? Am, entonces, eh, primero te explico por qué no necesitas aprender mucha gramática en inglés. O sea, te explico toda la gramática que el inglés y el español tienen en común, ¿ok? Pero que los otros cursos de inglés te van a tratar de enseñar y muchas personas terminan muy confundidos porque se preguntan, pero ¿por qué estoy aprendiendo eso? O sea, ¿qué diferencia tiene esto con el español? Bien, y la verdad es que no tiene ninguna diferencia. Am, y luego te voy a dar como una lección de ejemplo sobre cómo hacer preguntas en inglés, que tiene que ver con las actividades de listening que hemos hecho anteriormente, o sea, creo que el primer día, y también una actividad de listening que vamos a hacer al final de esta clase. O sea, perdón, un juego de conversación más bien que vamos a hacer al final de esta clase. Luego hablo sobre los sonidos en inglés que no existen en español y que por ende ocasionan la mayoría de los errores de pronunciación. Bien, luego doy una pequeña lección sobre uno de estos sonidos que no existe en español, cómo pronunciarlo. Y finalmente te voy a enseñar unas palabras en inglés que digo son palabras al instante. O sea, son esas palabras como animal, animal, president, presidente, que se parecen mucho a sus equivalentes en inglés. Y también viene de todo un curso de inglés que yo tengo en que enseño ese tipo de palabra. Bien. Y al final vas a ver la demostración de una actividad de un juego de conversación ah, que otra vez sí usé con mis estudiantes. Todo lo que vas a ver este curso son cosas sacadas de los cursos que realmente uso con mis estudiantes. ¿Ok? Otra cosita es que he tratado de hacer que el nivel del inglés que estoy usando como ejemplo sea más de nivel principiante. Bien, entonces si tienes un nivel más alto de inglés, no te preocupes. La idea es que aprendas las ideas más generales. ¿Ok? Y por eso estoy enseñando estas cosas más básicas, para que aprendas, para que aprendas cómo aprender y no necesariamente ciertas palabras o frases, etcétera. Am, y bien, al final de esta clase, ah, vamos a tener una sesión en vivo para hacer un club de conversación, igual que hicimos ayer. am, y justamente vamos a hacer esta actividad que voy a estar demostrando. ¿Ok? Entonces, por favor, presta mucha atención a esa actividad al final de esta clase. ¿Ok? Y otra vez, si tienes alguna pregunta o duda, por favor, escríbelo en el chat o en los comentarios y yo con gusto te atenderé. Y ya. Bueno, espero verte pronto en la clase, o sea, en el club de conversación, o si no, mañana en el último día de este intensivo de inglés. Bye. Finally, the final lesson. All the grammar that you do not need to learn. So, in my time as a teacher, I've worked with many students, in particular, many Spanish speaking students, and I've seen what people need to learn, the mistakes people usually make, and the mistakes that people never make. And unfortunately, I've seen that most English textbooks, courses, apps spend a lot of time teaching people things that they already know because it's the same in their first language, right? So courses that spend a very long time teaching how to use the word the, when in Spanish you have something very similar. So it's not something you need to spend too much time on. And in particular, there are things that really are complicated for someone who speaks a non-Western language An Asian language like Chinese or Korean or Japanese or Arabic or Indonesian, or another language that's just so different from English, and they represent problems that you're just not going to have, okay? And yet, fairly often students come to me and ask, well, what about this or what about this? I heard about this term, could you teach how to do this? Like, you didn't teach how to do reported speech. And of course I didn't teach how to do reported speech because in English it's very simple. I did teach it in fact, but I didn't make a big deal out of it because it's so simple in English. So now in this lesson I'm just going to go over all of the big things that people have asked me about that you don't really have to worry about because it's mostly the same as in Spanish. Okay, so first, determiners. So this is a word that can include what we call the articles before, and the, but it also includes this and that in English, as well as certain adjectives and numbers. In the end, this just ends up being a fairly useless grammar term in English. There are some East Asian languages like Korean, which I studied, where this is actually an important concept because in Korean, a determiner has to take a certain ending, but in English it just doesn't. So in English, okay, it really, I've already taught you how to use this, that, these, and those. I've already taught you how to use and. I've already taught you how to use the. You don't need to learn how to use determiners in general because in English, like in Spanish, it's not a big deal, okay? Next, reported speech. I've gotten a bunch of questions about this. As I already said in the earlier lesson, a reported speech is, for instance, if I say, yesterday the president said the company's profits will increase. In that case, I'm reporting what the president said and I'm summarizing it. I'm not quoting him directly, and that's quote-unquote reported speech. But in English, reported speech is just so simple. In Spanish as well, it's not something that really requires its own lesson. In some languages like Korean, which is a language I studied briefly, reported speech is fairly complicated. You need to have a special verb ending and everything to repeat what someone else has said. But in English you just don't, or in Spanish for that matter. So that's why I'm not really going into detail with it here. Next, passive voice. Passive voice. For a long time, and even somewhat today, a lot of English speakers have decided that they don't like the passive voice and we should all try to eliminate it. No actual professional writer and no linguist, certainly, no scientist of the language thinks that we should eliminate the passive voice. But it's unfortunately an obsession that some English speakers have had, especially English speakers who really, they haven't been trained in the language. They're not English teachers, well, at least they're not English as a second language teachers. They're not linguists. They're not very accomplished writers. They've just gotten the idea for some reason. They think it's bad. So what is the passive voice? Let me give you an example. The book was written by Mark Twain. The book was written by Mark Twain. So I could have said Mark Twain wrote the book, but instead I said the book was written by Mark Twain. So the was written by is the passive voice. And some people think that sounds bad. Some people think you should always say Mark Twain wrote the book and not the book was written by Mark Twain. Why? Well, it uses fewer words. Okay. But in the end, I think you get to decide. If you want to say the book was written by Mark Twain, that is okay. That is fine. There is no reason not to say that. If you want to say Mark Twain wrote the book, you can say that too. It means almost the same thing. There's a slight difference, and I think that slight difference is important. If you prefer to say the book was written by Mark Twain, or the course was taught by the teacher, or the video was recorded by the cameraman, etc., 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 I think that's okay. There is nothing wrong with that. But just so you know, that is passive voice, and many people think that there's something wrong with it. I promise you there is not anything wrong with it. Most native speaking Americans use the passive voice all the time without thinking about it. So do not worry about the passive voice, okay? Okay. Next, conditionals. Okay, in many languages this gets to be very complicated. In Spanish it's a little bit more complicated than in English, but not that complicated. So a lot of people will put a lot of emphasis on teaching this, but in the end, in English, it's just not complicated. So let me give you an example of a conditional. If you ask me for it, I'll give it to you. If you ask me for my car, I'll give you my car. If you ask me for the shirt I'm wearing, I will give you the shirt I'm wearing. So that if something happens, which hasn't happened, then I will do X, Y, Z. That's called a conditional, okay? And as you can see in English, it's pretty simple. You just say, if something happens, I will, da, 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 da. Pretty logical, pretty simple. There isn't a special verb tense, a special grammatical way of doing this in English. There just isn't. There isn't. So, yeah. And again, so let me give you another example. In the past, it's a little bit different. If you had told me, I would have helped you. So if you had told me you were having a problem, I would have helped you. If you had told me that you needed the money, I would have given you the money. If the teacher had known the student was sick, she would not have asked the student to do the extra work. Okay? So you can see that in English, again, I think we already talked about this in the lessons about conditionals. You know, we usually use would for this, so a phrase when we're talking about the past. If you had told me, I would have helped you. So you're saying what someone would do in a certain case. But again, I already talked about this in the lesson on helping verbs, okay? So it's very simple. I'm not going to give an extra lesson just for this because we already talked about it in the lesson on helping verbs. Okay, next. Relative clauses or relative clause. Okay, you really don't need to worry about this, but let me just give you some examples. The car that they bought last week was stolen. The car that they bought last week was stolen. So in that case, that they bought last week was the relative clause because it relates to the car. I don't know why. It seems to me like this is a useless grammar term. I don't really see what you gain by knowing that term. Also notice that in Spanish you say it almost the same way. The car that they bought last week was stolen. El coche que habían comprado la semana anterior fue robado. Okay, it's the exact same thing. It's, you know, you have an equivalent phrase in Spanish. That they bought last week, que habían comprado la semana anterior. It's the same. So you don't really need to learn this. You're just going to confuse yourself if you try to study this because the logic is the same in Spanish as in English. Another example of a relative clause. You are the person who I am looking for. You are the person who I am looking for. So there the relative clause is who I am looking for. Again, it's pretty much the same as you would say it in Spanish. You are the person who I am looking for, that I am looking for. Tú eres la persona que busco o a quien busco. One thing to notice here is that in English you have the option of eliminating the word that or who. So for instance, you could say, you are the person who I am looking for, or you are the person that I am looking for, or you are the person I am looking for. You are the person I'm looking for. And stop. As simple as that. As simple as that. You don't need to have the who or the that. It's optional. So that's one difference from Spanish. But again, I don't think that requires an entire lesson. Here's another example of a relative clause. Charles Dickens, who was the most famous English novelist of the 19th century, never used a typewriter. So Charles Dickens, who was the most famous English novelist of the 19th century, never used a typewriter. So there the relative clause is who was the most famous English novelist of the 19th century, never used a typewriter. Again, you would structure that sentence the same way in Spanish. So again, I don't see what would be the value in teaching you that. You could also just say Charles Dickens, the most famous English novelist of the 19th century, never used a typewriter. So you could eliminate who was from that phrase, the same as in Spanish. Again, I don't really need to teach you that because it's the same in Spanish. You already know that. Okay. So yeah, so that's why we don't really, I don't really think relative clauses are worth learning. One thing that's worth pointing out is, like I said, the word that, as in, it is the book that I am reading, you can usually eliminate. So you could say instead of it is the book that I am reading, it is the book I am reading. So that's one difference from Spanish. You can eliminate that word. But other than that, there's really not much to say about that. Okay, so congratulations, that's it. You now have all the knowledge you need to avoid the most common grammar errors that Spanish speakers make in English. This was a pretty short course, but as I said, since you already are a Spanish speaker and you've spent your whole life learning and mastering Spanish, you've also along the way learned and mastered a lot of English grammar, because so much of the English grammar is the same as the Spanish grammar. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this course. I hope that it's resolved any doubts that you may have, and I hope you now have a lot more confidence to go out in the world and start reading and writing and listening and speaking in English. I have been Joe Walsh, English teacher. If you have any questions about this course, please do not hesitate to contact me. See you later, take care, and bye-bye. 15. How to ask, are you David, or were you happy? Listen to the examples. Am I here? Aren't I correct? Was I there? Weren't you there? Are you Michael? Aren't you Melissa? Were you happy? Is it Friday? Weren't they in the hotel? Were they in Canada? The differences explained. So to ask a question like this in English, you just changed the order of the words. So for example, you are David becomes are you David? And you do the same for all of the others. So were you David, or were you the president? Were you the president? For you were the president. Or he wasn't the president becomes wasn't he the president? So he wasn't the president. Wasn't he the president? You just put the word like is, are, was, wasn't, weren't at the beginning of the sentence to make it a question. As simple as that. Okay. Also that, notice when you're asking a question, notice that we tend to say, aren't you, or isn't it, rather than are you not, or is it not. If you ask a question like, are you not, is it not, it sounds old-fashioned, and it also sounds very formal. Okay, so certainly when you are speaking, you definitely want to use the contraction for this. So always say, aren't you, or isn't it, or weren't they, not, are you not, or is it not, or were they not, because that second version just sounds strange. Okay, and finally, we say aren't I. You can't say amn't I, there's no such word. Okay, so notice you say isn't he, or aren't they, but for I, it's aren't I, okay? I'm not, but aren't I. I don't know why, but there's no amn't in English, okay? So you would say aren't I instead of amn't I, which doesn't exist. Practice. Practice. Translate these phrases. 1. Are you okay? 2. Are we in the park? 3. Were you in Canada? 4. Am I permitted? 5. Isn't it correct? 6. Aren't I the president? 7. Weren't they similar? 8. Wasn't it your car? Okay. Mental exercise. So today, try to ask yourself questions in your head about what you see around you. For instance, is it a computer? Is that a dog? Or isn't that a house? Or isn't that car a Toyota? Okay? Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next lesson. Until then, take care. 15. How to ask, are you David? Or were you happy? Listen to the examples. Am I here? Aren't I correct? Was I there? Weren't you there? Are you Michael? Aren't you Melissa? Were you happy? Is it Friday? Weren't they in the hotel? Were they in Canada? The differences explained. So to ask a question like this in English, you just change the order of the words. So for example, you are David becomes are you David? And you do the same for all of the others. So were you David, or were you the president? Were you the president? For you were the president. Or he wasn't the president becomes wasn't he the president? So he wasn't the president. Wasn't he the president? You just put the word like is, are, was, wasn't, weren't at the beginning of the sentence to make it a question. As simple as that. Okay. Also that, notice when you're asking a question, notice that we tend to say aren't you or isn't it rather than are you not or is it not. If you ask a question like are you not, is it not, it sounds old-fashioned and it also sounds very formal. Okay, so certainly when you are speaking, you definitely want to use the contraction for this. So always say aren't you or isn't it or weren't they, not are you not or is it not or were they not, because that second version just sounds strange. Okay, and finally, we say aren't I. You can't say amn't I. There's no such word. Okay, so notice you say isn't he or aren't they, but for I, it's aren't I. Okay, I'm not, but aren't I. I don't know why, but there's no amn't in English. Okay, so you would say aren't I instead of amn't I, which doesn't exist. Practice. Practice. Translate these phrases. 1. Are you okay? 2. Are we in the park? 3. Were you in Canada? 4. Am I permitted? 5. Isn't it correct? 6. Aren't I the president? 7. Weren't they similar? 8. Wasn't it your car? Okay. Mental exercise. So today, try to ask yourself questions in your head about what you see around you. For instance, is it a computer? Is that a dog? Or isn't that a house? Or isn't that car a Toyota? Okay? Well, that's it for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next lesson. Until then, take care. Okay, this lesson is going to be very short because this sound really only exists in words that end in S-I-O-N. It does happen that there are kind of a lot of sounds that exist in that, there are a lot of words that end in S-I-O-N in English, and people do tend to make pronunciation mistakes with these words, so I thought it was worth teaching this sound. So, for instance, vision, vision, occasion, occasion, persuasion, persuasion. Okay, let's try that again. Vision, vision, occasion, occasion, persuasion, persuasion. Okay, this sound doesn't quite exist in Spanish except in some dialects of Spanish. There's a city in Colombia, Medellin, where they tend to pronounce the Medellin pretty much the same way, but most dialects of Spanish do not have this sound. If you pronounce this sound wrong, well, there aren't many words that have it. On the other hand, it would be hard to understand without it. So let me say the words again, first correctly and then incorrectly. Okay, so 1, vision, vision. 2, vision, vision, which is incorrect, there's no such word. Next, occasion, occasion, occasion. 2, occasion, 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 no such word. Okay, let's try it again with a different sound. 1 correct, vision, vision. 2 incorrect, wissen, 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 no, incorrect, obviously incorrect. Okay, even though it's spelled S-I-O-N, it's a totally different sound than the letter S. Okay? Okay, now I'm going to say the word correctly and then incorrectly and see if you can hear it. Okay. No, sorry, I'm going to say the word correctly or incorrectly and tell me if it's correct or incorrect. Okay, does it have the sound or does it not have the sound? Vision, vision, vision. Okay, in that case it's incorrect. It should be vision, vision, vision. Okay. Occasion, occasion, occasion. In that case, that is correct. Occasion is correct. How about this? Vision, vision, vision. Again, that was correct. Persuasion, persuasion, persuasion. Incorrect. Okay, it should be persuasion, 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 persuasion. Okay? Okay, so just a quick pronunciation practice. Try to repeat after me. You can't really stretch this sound out, so I'm not going to try too much. Okay, just repeat after me. Vision, 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 vision. Occasion, 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 occasion. Persuasion, persuasion, persuasion. Okay? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye. Lesson 1. Words that end in AL in English and whose equivalent words also end in AL in Spanish. So there are so many of these words that end in AL in English and in AL in Spanish that I'm actually dividing these up into 5 different lessons so you don't get overwhelmed, okay? We want this to be fun, we want this to be exciting, we don't want to get bored because when you're bored you don't learn. So we're going to stay excited and we're going to go through the words in alphabetical order, okay? And keep in mind, we're only going to go over the words that you're actually likely to hear in English today, okay? There are many, many thousands of other words that are very obscure, scientific words, technical words, literary words, that if you have a career in a specific area, you'll eventually learn them, but we're going to focus in this course just on the words that you actually are going to hear in real life on a day-to-day basis, okay? Okay, so first word, abdominal, 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 okay? The muscles in your midsection, the same in English as in Spanish, okay? Abnormal, 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 okay, a very negative word. It's the same meaning in English as its counterpart in Spanish. It's historically mostly been used in psychology or criminology or things like that. Maybe it's being less used nowadays because it's a pretty negative word, right? Okay, next. Abysmal, abysmal. Okay, again, the same meaning as the corresponding word in Spanish, except I think that we actually use this word more in English. It's a very fancy way of saying that something is very bad. It's abysmal. Okay, a little pretentious, this word, but if you watch TV or read the newspaper, you will encounter this word. Next, accidental, accidental, accidental. The same word in English, as the same meaning rather in English and in Spanish. Additional, additional, additional. We can offer you additional services for an additional fee. The same meaning in English and in Spanish. Next. Agricultural, agricultural, agricultural. The government has a very large agricultural budget. Or the government is regulating the use of agricultural chemicals in fertilizers and pesticides. The same meaning in English and in Spanish. Next, animal, 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 animal. One of the most common words in English, and it's the same in English and in Spanish with no difference in meaning. Notice though that we would say two animals, no E there, two animals. The S goes directly on the end. Okay, next. Annual, annual, annual. He has an annual salary of $1 million. Oh, an interesting point though, in the US and Canada, we tend to quote salaries as annual salaries. Okay, so we say someone is making, I don't know, $50,000. It's $50,000 per year, not per month. Still not bad, but anyway. Again, other than that, same meaning in English and Spanish. Next. Artificial, artificial, artificial. Again, the same meaning in English and in Spanish. I am trying to avoid the use of artificial ingredients in my all-natural cookies. Next, beneficial, beneficial. This supplement is supposed to be beneficial for your health. The same meaning in English as in Spanish. Next, brutal, brutal. Okay, this is a very negative word. It has the same meaning in English and in Spanish. My team suffered a brutal loss yesterday. They lost 25-0. Next, canal, canal, canal. Okay, this is a tricky word because it really has a very specific meaning in English, only one specific meaning in English. Canal is an artificial river, okay? So they dig a ditch and they put water in it so that they can move water from here to there. That's a canal. And that's the only meaning of canal in English, okay? Or maybe also the ear canal, which is a kind of tube inside your ear that the sound enters, or there's a food canal that in your body where you digest food, okay? But it absolutely does not mean like a channel on TV. A TV channel is something else completely. It's a different word, channel, okay? Not canal, channel. So don't make that mistake, okay? Next, capital, capital, capital. The same meaning in English as in Spanish, capital, C-A-P-I-T-A-L, okay? So he has a capital of, or the company has $20 million of investment capital. The company has $20 million of investment capital. Or the capital of New York State is Albany, not New York City. Or the capital of Canada is Ottawa, not Toronto, okay? There's another word in English which is also pronounced capital, but it's spelled C-A-P-I-T-O-L, and it means the Capitol building, just that. That's the only meaning of that word. So in Washington, for instance, one of the most famous buildings in the United States is the enormous Capitol building, a white building with a famous enormous white dome on top. That's the Capitol with an O. Next, cardinal, cardinal. Same in English and Spanish, multiple different meanings. The cardinal directions are north, south, east, and west. A cardinal can also be an official in the church. And in the United States and Canada, there is also a native bird called the cardinal, and it's usually red. It's a very beautiful bird if you get to see it. And it's also the baseball team from St. Louis, the St. Louis Cardinals. Next, carnival, carnival, carnival. Okay, this could be the famous carnival that happens right before Lent, but we also tend to use it, at least in the United States and Canada, to refer to a traveling fair. So there are these companies, well, in Latin America too, not just the US and Canada, that bring different amusements. In North America, usually just in the summer, and then in the North American winter, sometimes they go to Mexico to take advantage of the good weather. So they have rides, they have maybe a little roller coaster, maybe they have a carousel or a merry-go-round, maybe they have games to play, and that's a carnival. Okay, that's actually the most common kind of carnival in the US because the carnival that comes before Lent it's not a tradition that we have in the US and Canada or the UK as far as I know. It's associated more with Latin America, okay? All right, next, casual, casual, casual. It's the same meaning, right? So I'm wearing casual clothes today, just a t-shirt and jeans. Okay, next, cathedral, cathedral, cathedral. Okay, the famous Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. It's the same meaning in English as in Spanish. Next, central, central, central. This office building is centrally located at the center of the city. This office has a central location at the center of the city, okay? Same in English and in Spanish. Next, cereal, cereal, cereal. So this word means the same in English and Spanish, except that it's come to be used mostly in English for the boxes of breakfast cereal like corn flakes or wheat flakes or shredded wheat. Okay, so even though the real meaning of cereal is the same in both languages, we tend mostly to use it in English just for that, for the corn flakes, frosted flakes, etc. Okay, next, ceremonial, ceremonial, ceremonial. Exactly the same in English and Spanish. So you could say nowadays in the UK, the Queen has mostly a ceremonial role. She doesn't really rule the country. Sorry, Queen. Okay, next, colonial, colonial, colonial. Pretty much the same in both languages, right? Notice the difference though that in the US, the colonial period ends in 1776 with the independence of the US. So all of the architecture from, or none of the architecture from the 19th century is considered colonial in the United States. Okay, next. Communal, communal, communal. Notice that in English this word has two M's, two letters M. Okay, unlike in Spanish, I don't know why, but it does. That's very common in English to double up a letter that in Spanish you only have one of. It doesn't change the pronunciation, however. So you could say the building has a communal laundry room. We don't really use it that often. Okay, we actually don't usually use the word communal that often. Communal more often used in the context of a religious group. Okay, so the church is a communal space for the parish. Okay, next. Conceptual, conceptual, conceptual. Same as in Spanish. So the design is moving from the conceptual phase to the prototype phase. Okay, next. Conditional, conditional, conditional. Same as in Spanish. My love for you is not conditional. My love is unconditional. Okay, next. Oh, actually, that's the end. Okay, that's the end of this lesson. I hope to see you in the next lesson. Okay. Hola and hello, everybody. Hola a todos. Espero que vayan a disfrutar mucho de esta clase. Vamos a estar haciendo un juego de higher y low, o sea, más alto y más bajo. Vamos a estar aprendiendo y practicando cómo hablar de las edades y también practicando los números, cosas muy, muy, muy importantes. Y como vamos a ver, la forma de decir tu edad en inglés es muy diferente a cómo la hacemos en español. También vamos a practicar haciendo preguntas con are you, o sea, eres tú o estás tú, o es usted o está usted o están ustedes o son ustedes. También respondiendo con yo soy o yo estoy, o sea, en inglés I'm. Bien. Y la dinámica es que supongamos que el uno al otro nos estamos preguntando las edades. No vamos a decir nuestras edades reales, ¿okay? Porque vamos a estar ensayando los números del 4 al 9. Entonces vamos a fingir que somos niños de, bueno, entre esas edades, ¿ok? Y claro, si se te alcanza el tiempo y si tus amigos, si tus compañeros se ponen de acuerdo y saben hacerlo, también pueden usar otros números, decir sus edades reales si quieren, pero vamos a empezar con estos números aquí, ¿ok? De 4 a 9. Listo. Y para repasar, los números de 4 a 9 son 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, oops, 8, and 9. Okay, repitan conmigo. 4, 4,
4,
5,
5,
6,
6,
7,
7,
8,
8,
and 9.
9.
Okay, so let's start. And en la actividad real vamos en orden alfabético la primera vez, ¿ok? Pero vamos a empezar, bueno, primero yo y luego Carlos, ¿ok? Entonces vamos a hacerlo entre Carlos y yo y luego lo pueden hacer Andrés y Gabriel. ¿Bien? Ok. So, pero primero voy a repasar el diálogo de ejemplo. Ok. Are you 7? Are you 7? ¿Tienes 7 años? Are you 7? O sea, nota que en inglés se pregunta así, are you 7? O sea, eres 7 o estás 7. Que suena raro en español, pero así lo decimos en inglés. Así de sencillo. Are you 7? ¿Tienes 7 años? Bien. Y responde, no, I'm younger. No, I'm younger. ¿Ok? Si puede repetir conmigo esa palabra younger. 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 ¿Ok?
Younger.
Muy bien. Algo raro en el inglés es que esta G no se pronuncia cuando decimos young, o sea, joven. Young es joven. Pero cuando decimos younger, más joven, esta G sí se pronuncia. Si se dice younger, younger. No te preocupes demasiado por la pronunciación, pero para que sepas, si suena un poco raro es por eso. También notas que mientras en español decimos más joven o menor, en inglés decimos younger. Le agregamos este R que significa como más. ¿Okay? No es así con todas las palabras así en inglés. A veces se le agrega R, a veces se le agrega otra palabra que es como más. ¿Okay? Pero con esta palabra sí es con R al final. Entonces, no, I'm younger. No, soy mayor o no, tengo más años. ¿Okay? O literalmente, no, perdón, no soy menor, tengo menos años. I'm younger. Literalmente, soy más joven. Bien. Entonces sigue preguntando, are you 4? Are you 4? Entonces, porque está tratando de adivinar su edad. Are you 4? ¿Tienes 4 años? Y responde, no, I'm older. No, soy mayor. No, I'm older. ¿Ok? No tengo más años. O literalmente soy más viejo. ¿Okay? Y si quieres repetirlo conmigo, older. Older. ¿Ok?
Older.
Muy bien. Y notas otra vez que eso de R significa más. Older. Que literalmente más viejo. No, soy más viejo. O no, soy mayor. O no tengo más años. Y ahora pregunta otra edad, ok, tiene que ser menos 7, pero superior a 4. Entonces tiene que ser entre 5, pero tiene que ser 5 o 6. ¿Okay? Números entre 4 y 7, 5 o 6. Entonces pregunta, are you 5? Are you 5? ¿Tienes 5 años? Y ya, a ti no, dice, yes, I am. Yes, I'm 5. Sí, tengo 5 años. ¿Ok?
Ok.
Ok, entonces, vamos a empezar. Carlos, si tú puedes pensar en una edad y yo voy a tratar de adivinar.
Ok, listo.
Ok. Carlos, are you 6?
No, I'm older.
Ok. No sé, Gabriel, si tú quieres adivinar.
Carlos, are you 7?
No, I'm older.
Ok, Andrés.
Carlos, are you 9?
No, I'm younger.
Ok, Carlos, are you 8?
Yes, I'm 8.
Ok, espero que todos entendieron lo que hicimos. Ok, Carlos pensó en un número 8, un número entre 4 y 9, en este caso 8, y todos preguntamos y nos iba guiando diciendo si era mayor o menor. Okay, o sea, older, mayor o menor, younger. Ok. Ok, ahora Carlos, bueno, ¿quién ganó? I won. Ok, so yo gané, así que yo voy a pensar en un número. Voy a hacer un número, una edad entre comillas, entre 4 y 9. Ok. Um, Carlos, ¿por qué no empiezas?
Okay. Are you 6?
No, I'm younger. Gabriel?
Are you 5?
Yes, I am 5. ¿Ok?
All right.
Entonces, ahora Gabriel pensaría en el número y seguiría así. ¿Ok? Así vamos a practicar muy bien los números entre 4 y 9 y también cómo preguntar las edades. Excelente. Ok. No sé si ustedes tres tienen alguna pregunta o comentario sobre la actividad antes de que nos despidamos.
No, o sea, que intenten también experimentar con este diálogo con sus edades y lo hagan más dinámico.
Sí, claro. Sí, la idea con esta actividad es que sea la más básica posible, o sea, que una persona, aunque no sepa nada de inglés, puede participar, pero si ya saben algo de inglés y ya saben más números, claro, pueden ponerse de acuerdo entre ustedes para, sí, para practicar con otros números. También si tienen alguna duda sobre la pronunciación, sobre vocabulario, gramática, lo que sea, entonces no dudes en enviarnos un mensaje por WhatsApp o antes o durante de la sesión en Zoom, ¿ok? All right, guys, muy bien, chicos. See you later, nos vemos. Mucha suerte con inglés. Good luck with English. Bye bye.
Bye.
Ups. Estoy tratando de apagar esto y no. ¡Ay, no! ¿Qué hice? One second, un segundo. A ver. One second. Sorry. Bueno, ya pueden irse, perdón. Los que están viendo este video. Mientras yo busco el botón para apagar. Ups. Stop recording. Okay, bye bye. Yes. Great, excelente. Hemos llegado al final de esta clase. Por favor, si puedes buscar el enlace de Google Meet para el club de conversación que vamos a hacer ahora mismo. El enlace debería estar o en el chat o en el primer comentario del video o en la descripción del video, de acuerdo aquí en YouTube. Bien, y si estás viendo la grabación después, claro, el club de conversación no va a estar disponible, pero bueno, espero que puedas acompañarnos mañana en el último club de conversación de este intensivo. Bueno, nos vemos. See you in the conversation club. Nos vemos en el club de conversación.